I do have to say I feel really extremely privileged to be here today, and so it is a real privilege for me. It's also very daunting because I've just also heard the names of all the people who have delivered this lecture before. So it's a hard act to follow. But what I would like to do is actually try and give you a very different vision of how we should look at the economy, and therefore also at economists. And in effect, what I would like to suggest is that most of our tribe, and I think in that I'm going to agree with me, most of our tribe of economists has actually been fooling people for a very long time. And not only because we pretend to understand things that we don't, but also because we have given you a very wrong impression of what the economy is for. In other words, we have enslaved society to the economy and to a particular notion of what constitutes progress, whereas in fact it should be the other way around. We are always treating the economic growth, and here that's defined entirely in terms of the growth of the national income, of GDP, gross domestic product. We are defining progress in terms of the growth of GDP, and everything else is subordinated to that. So even when we want to do something, we are told we have to do it because it's good for the economy. So we have to get more women into the workforce because that will generate more GDP. We have to improve the health of our workers because then they will be more productive and create more GDP. We have to educate our workers because then they will be more skilled and create more GDP. In other words, everything that society does is designed to be worshipping at the altar of the god of increasing GDP. And I would put it to you that we got it completely wrong. The economy is actually supposed to serve society. We are not supposed to be serving the economy. And yet, that's the way our policymakers think, that's the way our media presents it, and that's the way, in the end, all of us end up thinking. Whether we want to or not, we all end up thinking, maybe yes, maybe that's what we're supposed to do. That's why we have to defend something. The number of times I have been before different kinds of policymakers in India, of course, but in many other countries, and in our state governments, and had to justify something on the grounds that it could contribute to GDP, when it is so patently obvious that it will help the people. But that's not good enough. It's not good enough that it will help the people. What it has to do is to actually improve GDP. Now, this does not have to be the story. And more and more people around the world are actually recognizing this. I happened to be last year, in fact, on a WHO, the World Health Organization, created a council on the economics of health for all. And it was actually entirely all women. It was led by quite a well-known economist called Mariana Mazzucato. But we decided on our very first meeting that we have to change the approach, because the WHO also expected us to suggest ways in which an economy that it delivers health for all is actually good for the economy. That's how everybody thinks, whether you're in the UN or anywhere. And we said, no, we want an economy that delivers health for all. So let's think of the elements of health for all and then say, what is the economy that will deliver that? It may involve more GDP or less GDP, that's not the point. The point is what it will give us, that health for all. And in fact, it's that perspective with which I would like you to think about the topic I'm taking on today, which is the human rights economy. Because as I said, this idea is pretty. It was there in that council report of the WHO, which has been adopted by the World Health Assembly. So clearly there are some people somewhere in the world that are thinking this way. The High Commissioner for Human Rights in the United Nations system has recently declared that he wants to work towards a human rights economy. Same thing, that it's an economy that delivers human rights, that it is not that delivering human rights is going to be good for the economy, and that's why we should do it. And of course, now we have to also recognize that it's not just us human beings who have the rights, but it is nature and the planet whose rights we have been eroding and destroying now for too long, and we are already facing the consequences of that. So essentially, we need the rights-based economy, not only because it's also good for society, but for our very own survival and for planetary survival. What are the elements of that economy? What would a human rights-based economy be overall and in India? So let me first remind ourselves, and here I would in fact like to quote from Sri RAMLAL. I was fortunate enough to get some of the extracts of some things that he has written. And it's very important that he has also said this. Human beings are endowed with eternal and unalienable rights. Human rights have to be, in fact, enshrined not only in international laws, but in constitutional laws of free nations as well. Now, when you're saying that they are eternal and unalienable, you cannot take it away from someone. Unfortunately, we know that you can. We know that societies and states can constantly take away the human rights of people. But that's also because we allow them to. In other words, it's because we, citizens, people, societies, are just fallen prey to a notion of somehow an idea of progress which is not just material, but it is also entirely based on the value of exchange. Because GDP is only the sum total of all the exchange transactions that occur. It leaves out far too much that is of value in our societies, whether it is the women relations or the care work or any of these things. It brings in far too much, and it is desperate and bad for our societies, whether it is weapons of mass destruction or pollution or any of those things. So we have to rethink the way we think the economy by, first of all, identifying the human rights that are critical and important, and then saying, okay, what can we do with our economy to change all of that? Okay, what essentially that means is that we have to think of human beings in terms of our health, our human capabilities, our ability to have freedoms, our social cohesion, justice, all of those things, of course. And we have to recognize, as I said, our planetary boundaries and the rights of nature in a way. And we have to place all of those above the rights of business and private property. Because they have to remember, we are creatures of nature. And if you like, a typical economist way of putting it, but an economist colleague of mine said that, we are all a wholly owned subsidiary of nature. Nature is not an externality for us. We are part of nature, and we are basically going to be controlled by nature, whether we think so or not, and whether we like it or not. But also, we have to stop placing the rights of business and private property above those rights of people and nature and the planet. We do this all the time. International law does this all the time. Okay, you have a natural person, which is all of us. And you have other persons, which is business. And I can tell you, and I'm sure the lawyers and the artists will agree with me, the rights of those other persons, business, legal persons, are generally placed above ours. They're always privileged over the rights of human beings. But we have other examples of the recognition and of human rights. And of course, there is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, it's one of those things that people mention, but I think everybody's forgotten about it, or it's just something that's mentioned. It's a bit like, in the beauty contests when the finalists are asked, what do you want? And they say, oh, we want world peace. It's like that. Oh yes, you could, we all want the universal declaration of human rights. When you think about that document, it's a revolutionary document. You cannot deliver that document without a complete transformation of how we organize our polities, our societies, our economies. It's a very radical document, actually. And our government in 1948 was a signatory, along with all the other governments in the UN General Assembly. It was passed unanimously in December 1948. I want to just identify a few of these which have direct economic implications. I'm sure all of you are aware of the civil and political rights of people. Anyways, what I was looking at it's not a very long document, but let me just identify some of the economic rights that are mentioned there. I think it is Article 23. The right to work, free choice of employment. So you're not forced by material circumstances to do terrible work. Just and favorable conditions of work, not the terrible, fragile, vulnerable and exploitative conditions that so many of our people face. And protection against unemployment. Okay? Equal pay for equal work for all men and women. So, there's Article 23, which we signed on to in 1948. Article 24, the right to rest and leisure. And it's so important that they recognize this way back then, because economists have only just begun to realize that there is a thing called time poverty. And that time poverty is not concentrated among those high-flying executives and the fellows who want to work 90 hours a week because they do presentations on planning stock strategy, travel first class. Time poverty is the greatest among the poor. And it is the greatest amongst women who are poor. And those women are working many more than 90 hours a week, I promise you. And time use surveys that Indira Ben has been so important in influencing have shown us how long the working hours are. And yet we recognize that there is a human right to leisure. And I would argue it's not just rest and leisure, it's also the right to, the Constitution in Ecuador had the wonderful phrase, the right to social interactions. Time for social relationships. Because in fact, many poor women have to often commute long distances, work long hours, and then do so much unpaid housework that they don't really have time, or even social relationships, or rest and leisure. So yes, they recognize that as a fundamental right. Article 25 is very important, because it contains a whole bunch of rights in just one. It says the right to a standard of living, adequate for health and well-being and dignity. Now, what does that mean? It includes food, it includes clothing, they mention all these things. It includes housing, medical care, necessary social protection for when you cannot work on your own livelihood. And all of this, within this, they also specify that motherhood and childhood deserve special consideration and have additional rights beyond that. Okay? Isn't it funny to think that all these governments signed on to this? So clearly governments even in 1948 were as cynical as they are now. They thought we could sign on to anything and forget about it later. Article 24, the right to education. Again, something that we claim we are delivering, and I would argue we aren't really delivering in its Buddhist sense. It explains the ways in which that right can actually be fully realized. Now, many years, when I said that, they signed this statement and went up and forgot about it, that's not strictly fair. In a few days, we will be celebrating the anniversary of the Constitution of India being adopted. And in that Constitution, we have the directive principles of state policy, which contain many of these rights. Of course, the problem with that, and I'm sure the lawyers here will know, the problem with that is that these are then not actionable. That is, the government cannot be accountable for not delivering them. Although I will talk about that, how we did try to introduce some rights-based legislations. But let's remember some of those directive principles, which our Constitution actually, I don't know if it enshrines it, but it certainly mentions it, puts it out there as an essential element of what state policy should be directed to. And it means a livelihood. That the ownership and control of material resources of the community should not be so distributed that they do not serve the common good. In other words, they have to be distributed in a way that best serves the common good. Not the good of a few people who can have very, very large weddings and so on. You mean, sir? The operation of the economic system should not result in the concentration of wealth and means of production to common detriment. I wonder if policymakers today even remember that this is in the directive principles. So it's going so far in the other direction. Equal pay for equal work for men and women, they put that in the directive principles as well. They put it explicitly in there. And to ensure that working conditions do not undermine the health and strength of those who are forced to work. The children are given opportunities and facilities to develop in a healthy manner and in conditions of freedom and dignity. You see, the word dignity also keeps coming back. So they did have these notions of not just economic justice, but social justice as well. Our generation that produced RAMLAL, PARIKH and others, that generation was aware that this is the kind of society we need to have and need to produce. We know, I'm going to have to give you the story of our Indian and the evolution of the Indian economy over a very long period. But one shift that everybody talks about is the early 1990s. When apparently we shifted from what is the Hindu rate of growth to what is suddenly this, faster rate of growth, which is the result of neoliberal economic policy, the freeing of the economy from the constraints of being shackled by government controls and all of that. And apparently now we're back to some other, I don't know what, a Hindu rate of growth, which is lower than the real one. But anyway, in that period, in the 1990s, we saw what we thought at the time was a significant increase in inequality. It turned out we were innocent 90s. We had no idea how much inequality could grow. So at that time, many of us, and I can see many people in the audience who did this at the same time, were protesting the kinds of inequality that emerged during that first phase of liberalization in the 1990s. And we got a reaction. We got, I think, perhaps even mention it later, but we did get a phase of a reaction to that. And we got a reaction that actually meant that governments, partly desired to, but largely was forced to bring in rights-based legislation in the period after 2004. And broadly, well, in fact, definitely you can identify it's between 2005 and 2013. Between those years, we had a slew of rights-based legislations. They were not adequate. They were not what we wanted fully. We all wanted much more out of those. We wanted a more comprehensive degree of that. But nonetheless, we got some rights-based legislations, which we did not have before. In other words, suddenly the state was supposedly accountable for some of those directive principles, which are in the Constitution, which it could actually afford to ignore in that time. Let me remind you, we got the right to work. NREGA, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, being brought by the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, although I'm told that they no longer call it that. But anyway, the right to education, which we had to really fight for. I was at that time in the Knowledge Commission, and I was one of the people who argued that we have to make this a law. And most of the other people, with a one sense I can tell you, I happened to be in that Knowledge Commission as the token woman and the token leftist. So they could take 2 boxes with one person in there, So most of the others there were not in favor of a right to get education, because it's too expensive, I was told in a meeting by a very eminent person who was and remains universally respected, that you cannot bankrupt the country by trying to put every child into school. That was the kind of mindset created by a notion of not just neoliberal, economics, but of fundamental state incapacity. Give me the money, there's the money. And literally I have a story. Okay, you find me the money. You tell me exactly which things I can cut or what I can do to get that money that will put every child into school. But nonetheless, we got that right to education. So that too, it wasn't adequate. But we are not actually, the state today is not delivering on even those commitments. and there have been many audits on that right to education. Many of those things that are proposed to them are pretty good, actually. They are demanding not just schooling, but certain times of schooling, certain facilities, certain conditions, certain qualities that are stated for the teachers, so that you can't just have a school created by asking some local woman in the village who has maybe done class age to sit under a tree and teach people, but you actually have to have a school of the kind that we would like to send our own children to. So all of that was in the right to education. The right to information, absolutely critical, and again something that has been massively undermined by simply not allowing information acknowledgements and deciding that all kinds of things are not the rights of citizens to know, but they can just be called objects of curiosity. So we don't need to.
And then,
the right to information is critical because it is one of the things that can help you to ensure all the other rights. The most expensive per capita, and it delivers the worst health outcomes. And it is among the bottom of all rich countries in terms of health outcomes. But we're following that model. Instead of a right to health that would give every person in India, I'm now even hesitant to use the word citizen because we all know that even that that was one of the things we saw at the WHO Council, but it's not just the curative part. The preventive part is equally important, and the preventive part means a lot of things. It means proper nutrition. Proper meaning not undernutrition and not malnutrition either, the wrong kind. Proper sanitation, proper access to water, etc., etc. And the right not to work in ways that will undermine your health, something that was in the directive principles of state policy in our constitution. So we didn't get the right to think. I would argue that now, 10 years down the line, 11 years down, 12 years later, we now know that there are other rights we should have been thinking of. The right to decent housing, livable housing, because we all know, and certainly in cities like Delhi and Ahmedabad, we are surrounded by people living in the most inhuman conditions, and in slums that's why perhaps we don't get a census, so we don't really realize how badly people are living in so many parts of our country. But the right to decent housing is a very important, decent and healthy housing is a very important part. The right to electricity. We still have very large parts of our population, especially in rural areas, who do not get access to electricity. And by the way, electricity doesn't just mean electricity anymore. It also means you can't function in the so-called modern world because you need connectivity, because everything's online. So whatever you want to do, you have to do online. And if you're not connected, and you can't be connected if you don't have electricity, you are denied all the other things which you should otherwise be able to access. The right to, shall we say, it's the equivalent of that right to leisure, but the right to the basic amenities that will prevent massive amounts of unnecessary unpaid labor. For example, the legions of women who still have to walk to collect water, and who have to walk longer and longer distances and spend longer and longer each time you collect that water, whether they are in urban or rural areas. The right to not have to collect fuel wood. It's true, we had an Ujjwala scheme, the idea was excellent. But in fact, you go to most, and I can say this, 100% of every rural household I visited that got the Ujjwala cylinder has never got a replacement because they became too expensive. They got another replacement just before the last election. That was the last one. But they got the first one and literally kind of kept there to do puja to in the house. Or when you have a guest, then you can perhaps, use it to show that you also have right gas and it doesn't look so bad that you made your wife go out there and collect all the fuel wood. But we still have women going out walking to collect fuel wood. These are not still seen as essential rights of people, which means that our economy is not designed to deliver these things. Now, let me go back to the right of work, because that's absolutely crucial, and that's the one that we're failing the most at in some ways. I mean, okay, we're failing on all of this, but if you do not allow people the ability to earn their livelihood in a decent and dignified way, then you are basically destroying their chances for pretty much everything else. Now, maybe this is the economist in me coming out, but I don't believe that you can resolve this by giving everybody a handout, saying, oh, we have universal basic income, we give everybody 2,000 rupees or 3,000 rupees and the problem is over. No, that is not true. There is a dignity that comes from work, but we also have to make sure that the working conditions are such that people can work in ways that do not undermine their health, deny them the right to leisure, and give them a minimally decent life. Okay? So why are we failing so much in that? When the right to work, the PARIKH was introduced, there was a terrific fight about getting it in at all, as you can imagine. And the original plan was to restrict it to people defined as below poverty line, and many, many other restrictions. With great difficulty, we managed to get it universal for every household, but it is still not universal for every person. It's universal for every household, and it is limited to 100 days. It turns out we never actually have delivered 100 days of work in any of the years since that scheme started. Some states managed as much as 1995 in some years. But in general, the scheme has provided 40 to 45 days per work, or those who have been registered in the scheme and then demanded the work. We then discovered that there were many little flaws in the laws that allowed it to be circumvented. There was a point about that the states would have to deliver unemployment insurance if they failed to provide employment within 15 days of the request for work. So the way this was solved, first of all, of course, you limit the number of households who can get the job cards. But then you don't date the application for work. When you have the scheme, then you date the application, and then you provide the work. So you don't have to pay that. Then, of course, the wage rate did not keep pace with inflation. It didn't keep pace with minimum wages. To date, this is a national wage, which is well below the minimum wages of 16 states in the country. So it's way below what we wanted. But nonetheless, we realize it's been a lifesaver. Okay, and I mean, it has all these limitations. And yet we know that in periods of major crisis, the crisis of 2008, 2009, the global financial crisis, when there was a collapse of employment, including in Surat and in various other places, in Gujarat as well, this was a lifesaver in the rural areas. We saw in COVID what happened, and how so many workers actually had to trek long distances to actually get access. But I think the other thing that we now recognize that we really need, if we have to pick up the 5 essential rights, I would say right to work, which we have to expand to urban areas, to every person, not just to every household, to expand the number of days, to change the nature of the work so that more skilled work can also be included in it, and it can be done. There are countries that have done it. There are state governments that are seriously thinking of it, and some have even begun the process of the schemes. And there are very detailed proposals on how to run an employment guarantee scheme. So it can be done. Okay. Right to work as an absolute essential. Right to food. And right to food is not just right to basic grain, wheat and rice, but it's fully, and many states in the south of the country are delivering a much more developed public distribution system, which includes edible oils, which includes pulses, which includes some essential items of food that go along with just basic grain. So right to food, absolutely essential. Right to education, proper education, living up to what has been stated in the law, which is doubling the education spending that we have in the country today. Right to health, and I've already talked about, we are among the worst countries in terms of out-of-pocket expenses on health, because we really do not provide proper public facilities, and now we've gone for this dreadful insurance-based model, which is going to lead to further disaster. And I would argue the right to social security, or simply put, the right to pensions. Pensions for those who cannot work, for disability, for any other reasons, for those who are old, too old to work. For those who have worked all their lives in unpaid form, and just because that work is not recognized, they're not seen as worthy of getting pensions. So the right to pension is an absolutely critical and major element, and many of us have argued that this pension should be fixed at half of the minimum wage, which is not such a big thing to ask, right? It's only half of the minimum wage. Countries like Nepal give half of the median wage. So that tells you that it can be done if you have the political will. So lots of rights we're asking for, yeah? And I can immediately see the people I was dealing with when I was in the Knowledge Commission coming saying, where is the money? Show us how you're going to find all of this. You can't just say we have to do this spending and that spending. They can do that, by the way, when it comes to big business. Okay, the 2017 tax rebate that was given to large corporations, we lost 2.1% of GDP. To put that in perspective, that is more than double the entire health spending of central and state governments put together. Even a way like that. Okay, why? Because then they invest more. Turns out they didn't invest more. They said, oh, fine, very good, you keep our profits, thank you. But immediately, whenever we are told that we have to deliver these rights, because we need an economy that delivers human rights. We don't need human rights to deliver the economy. We are told told that we're fiscally irresponsible. And that notion of fiscal irresponsibility comes from another part of that whole neoliberal paradigm, which is that you can't tax the rich. You can't tax big corporations because they are the agents of wealth creation. They are the guys we have to promote, incentivize, help, because as they grow, it will trickle down to everybody else. Now, it's interesting that trickle down part, now even World Bank doesn't talk about it, right? I mean, it's kind of lost its purchase in most of the world. Somehow in India, it keeps getting used, trickle down. We have to let the big A's and others keep earning more and more and more, and we have to let more and more billionaires, dollar billionaires join, because that will give us pride. See, we have so many Indian billionaires. Even though we know it doesn't trickle down. Even though we know it doesn't help us to deliver any of these things. So we have to actually start taxing the rich. Now here again is another interesting thing. How governments go and sign things. The G20, thanks to Brazil's active intervention, and I'm happy to say a group I was involved with was also really active in lobbying for it. When G20 passed a resolution on the taxation of extreme wealth and said that the governments of G20 will do all in their power to ensure that those who are classified as extreme wealthy in each country will be taxed fairly. Now, what does fairly mean? Fairly doesn't mean a lot. Fairly means that they'll be taxed the same as you and me. At the moment, by the way, they get away with paying no taxes. I haven't checked on our Indian billionaires, but I can tell you the two very well-known billionaires, Jeff Bezos and, Musk. Elon Musk, how could I possibly forget? They pay no taxes. They do not pay income taxes because there are all these fancy lawyers out there working out how to put their money in different things so that it becomes investment incomes, or their own spending is all done under debt so that they're not holding debts which cancel out any incomes. And so they actually do not pay taxes. Elon Musk has 11 children, so he gets child relief. Probably he does have that. I mean, I'm not making it up. I wish I were making it up. I haven't checked, and I don't think we will ever be able to check in India because we don't get access to information like that about the kinds of taxes that our very rich are paying. And by very rich, by the way, I don't mean the top 10%. I don't even mean the top 1%. I mean the top 0.1%. Okay? And in fact, if you want to go to billionaires, then we're talking about 0.00001%. Very few people. If you tax just 1,000 families, 2% of their wealth, you get 1% of GDP. If you tax 0.1%, this is a bigger group because we have a lot of people. 0.1% of the richest, you tax them 2% of wealth and impose a 33% inheritance tax. which is not a lot when you are centimillionaires. You won't really notice it. You get, believe it or not, 10% of GDP. This is a calculation that Prabhat Patnaik and I did before the rich got as rich as they did. This is a pre-pandemic calculation. Imagine now the kinds of money that would be involved. And of course, if people say, oh, it's impossible, we can't do it, etc., that's not true. Because now we have data. Now we have the automatic exchange of banking information for 142 countries. So at least the financial wealth we can track. And countries have done it. A country like Colombia, a developing country, has said, if you are a tax resident in Colombia, we're going to tax your wealth wherever you choose to hold it. Sure. Okay. We could do that if we wanted. So it's not something that's impossible. And in fact, now that this possibility occurs, there are more and more governments that are coming out there and saying they will do it. France, Spain, South Africa, Brazil, these are governments that are declaring that they will do a wealth tax or an income tax equivalent to 2% of the wealth. Now, let me actually tell you that we shouldn't be crying about for these poor guys, these billionaires and centimillionaires, because they will still pay less tax than we do. If you work it out, the effective rate of taxation will still be very small for them. But at least it will be something. We'll be moving in that direction, and think of what it can generate in terms of what you can do for the people. Now, all of this, of course, if you go and talk to anybody in, actually not in the finance ministry, not to the people in the taxation department, are very sympathetic to this. But if you talk to the standard economics commentators, shall we say, in India, they will say, oh, here's another crazy radical idea. You can't go around taxing the rich. They are a source of wealth creation. So here's the thing, we should also tell them when they tell us this, that the rate of investment in India is stagnant. The rate of private investment in India, that is, if you leave out the government investment, has been falling since 2012. Private investors are not investing. We're giving them all this money, we're not taxing them, we're giving them subsidies, we're giving them land, we're giving them these incredible labor laws which basically mean workers have no rights, but they're not investing. Why aren't they investing? Because there's no demand. So, yes, you can say we're going to go in for exports, but let's face it, we're not really competitive for most of our manufacturing exports. We have to rely on domestic demand. Domestic consumption is stagnant. And I can say this even though the government is not releasing its consumer expenditure survey data, because companies are saying this. Companies selling everything from motorcycles to biscuits to underwear are saying we cannot sell our goods because there isn't mass demand. It's like rising. So in other words, this is something which is actually even bad for the rich. It's not good for the big companies either. If we actually did this combination of delivery of rights, not only would we have a happier, healthier, more cohesive, just a more decent society, but we would also have effective demand. And we would have multiplier effect of that effective demand. So we would have a growth that Hermann Minsky described as the opposite of trickle down. He said a bubbling up. So I'm saying it's about time for us to say we want a human rights driven economy because we want to bubble up. We do not believe in trickle down. We want to bubble up, and we want to bubble up in a way that treats men and women as dignified entities and recognizes the limits of nature and the planet. Thanks.